Round two. Hey, we're starting our last panel of the day. That's on security technology directions, but this time it's going to be from the consultant standpoint. So we've got a group of consultants up here that are going to field some questions and have some open dialogue. So I ask you guys to speak into the microphone as we go through that. What we're going to do is we're going to start with just kind of introduction of our panel here. We've got Mark Schreiber with Safeguards Consulting. We've got Ryan Schonfeld with RAS, Drew Deatherage with Crux, Technology and Security Consulting, and Rene Rieder with Arup. And what I'm going to ask before we kind of kick this off is if each of you just give a quick introduction on you, your company, and what it is that you do for that company, so we've all got an idea where that starts. We'll start on the end.
Mark Schreiber, I'm based in South Carolina, and I have a small engineering firm. So I kind of represent the small business side of new consulting firm. Work for a very large engineering. There you go. That works now. I worked for a very large engineering firm and then went independent a few years ago. And my focus is on the larger industrial arena and universities.
Hi, I'm Ryan Schonfeld with RAS Consulting Investigations. We're LA-based. Security consulting and investigations firm. We focus on security operations. We also do A&E work. And I have background in law enforcement and former end user, and got my IT background as well.
Hi, my name is Rene Rieder. I'm from Arup Consulting Engineers. We are a global A&E engineering firm, about 18,000 worldwide. I'm based in the New York office and serve as the co-leader for the Americas Security and Risk Group. For me, my primary focus for the past about 20 years has been aviation security, so I sort of take it from that perspective as I talk about what, my views and what we see.
Drew Deatherage, co-founder of Crux. So we do four things. We consult, we design, we do a lot of project management, and we do a fair amount of training. Our areas of emphasis are security, obviously, network infrastructure, and audiovisual.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much. I'm RJ Hope with McDonnell. I'm on the RAISE advisory board for security specifiers. I lead a team of both physical and cybersecurity consulting folks. We're a team of about 38 now. And so let's go ahead and get started. I have been advised by Ray that the Russian hack that occurred earlier on our survey was found not to actually have happened at all. So what I'd ask you to do is, now we've all sat around and visited with a lot of these manufacturers and we've had time to talk amongst ourselves, is how does this change your view? So now when you look at the A through F choices here, has this changed at all for you? What do you think is the most important factor that's impacting you and your clients as you go forward? So we'll take just a quick second. Oh, look, we got 3 on there. We're moving right along. So one of the things that I noticed as I was sitting down with folks is cyber is becoming more and more of an issue within our industry, right? For the longest time as a physical security consultant, you really didn't ignore it, but it wasn't an item that you really worried about. But there might be others that say, still the folks that I'm dealing with, we're dealing with the mobile technologies. They're wanting more to be able to interact quickly and on the go with their technologies or what have you. So we'll give that another couple of seconds and we'll see where we get. Look at there. Ray, I told you it was all about who was up here. All right. All right, so let's download those answers. So we got a pretty big cyber push. So I'll ask anyone that chose cyber, or anyone that could say, did it change based on the discussions that you had today, or did you come in with that? Anyone who chose cyber? Yes, sir. It changed. What was the driver that made that change for you? It's really a what, I'm sorry? A true exposure out there, right? And that's something that we're hearing both from our clients as well as our peers. So we talk about security. I'll direct this to the panel. How has cyber and cyber issues come to you from clients, and how are you seeing that being addressed by your projects? We'll just start on the end since everybody's excited about this one.
So for those who've had to suffer with me in some of these conferences before, I've always been a huge advocate for hardening against cybersecurity threats. And so with the clients, it's always let's talk about this, but they clearly do not have a basis of knowledge in most cases. So they look to us in this room to actually help guide them. So one of the things that came out of today's discussions and is ongoing is our request to get guidance from the manufacturers on what they're capable of doing. So whether you call it a cyber hardening guideline or cyber standards or cyber recommendations, we need that information from all of the manufacturers that we work with so we can not nail them on cyber issues, but we can actually enable them for success when we're doing a deployment. The last thing we want to do is specify something that they're not capable of performing, because at the end it makes everyone look bad. So there's definitely been more discussion of that, but I think we're only just really kind of understanding how important this is within our industry, and we really need to continue to request this from manufacturers, not to mention the service providers on their installation and execution capabilities.
Excellent.
So for us, the conversation still is mainly starting with us pushing the dialogue with the end user, not so much them asking us about it. We're routinely having our clients have third-party pen testing done of their systems, having that done on a regular basis, as you know, the cyber threat is continually changing. So one pen test now is not necessarily good a year from now. And so it's definitely can't be a set it and forget it mentality. The other thing is, it's actually been a great tool for us because we work almost exclusively with end users directly. And it's been a great tool for getting budget for security projects, in that some of the products that they thought they wanted or that they're used to using, once you do the testing on those products and they see some of the vulnerabilities, it's much easier to push through a security project with a more robust or enterprise grade technology.
That's excellent. Excellent. Go ahead.
I guess I have more of a question that we tend to ask our clients a lot. How many people got memory sticks here from the integrators? How many people put it into an air gap machine first? Yeah, the number drops in half. You know, and that's the biggest thing that we see with a lot of our clients, is that their IT group will put in all these cyber policies in place. You know, they'll lock down IP ports, they'll do all the pen testing, they'll do all of that. And then we'll do a 5-minute social engineering exercise and go down to Staples and just drop a couple flash drives in front of a security door, and guaranteed you'll find one unplugged into the network. So there has to be the organizational, operational change of how people deal with cybersecurity also. So we can't 100% rely on the IT system, but we also need to rely on the human factor also. So, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, as we start looking at, and it's a challenge we've put out to a lot of our clients. We respond to RFPs all the time. And the RFP says to include one digital copy, usually on thumb drive. And we call up those people and say, are you sure you really want to do this for a security project? You know, what if we gave you a website that's downloadable from a secured site? You know, and it starts them sort of thinking about, you know, what they're actually asking for. So, I mean, we bring it up right from the RFP process, and then make sure when it gets translated across, how it actually gets dealt with from there.
So it's coming up more and more for us too. We have a large 500,000 square foot facility that's about to turn over, and the owner's IT department came to the consultant team and said, so you're about to deliver me a building full of internet devices. What have you done to ensure that that these devices are not going to compromise my network? So, and he went on to say, it's not in my budget. No one has provided any funding for us to do the pen testing, to do all of the due diligence that's necessary, because the owner didn't think about it. And the consultant community responsible for the project didn't bring it up soon enough. So we didn't get enough budget allocated and turned into a problem on the backside of the project. So definitely having that conversation right out of the gate is crucial. And understanding who's going to be responsible for each piece of the infrastructure, as far as not only designing and installing it, but testing and certifying that infrastructure as well. So that cost has got to be borne somewhere, so we need to get it addressed early.
So Drew, you brought up a great question there. When IT wasn't involved, you were dealing probably with facilities or security, again, the security system design, and IT wasn't brought along. And as more and more electronic security becomes more IT based, right? We're getting a lot more IT folks versus the traditional physical security guy or gal. How do you incorporate that early to either get those decision makers at the table, and if you do, to kind of help break down those walls to get folks like the manufacturers involved early so that they can present and how their solutions are going to meet their needs, or you can get those captured early.
Well, it's a challenge depending on the owner, but I will tell you that I'm not ashamed to tell you I use scare tactics. You start telling them what's going to happen if we don't get the owner's side of the table fully engaged and involved in the conversation. And really, you're just telling stories about what can and has happened if we don't bring all those folks to the table up front.
And that includes the consultant team, the host team, as well as system manufacturers, maybe the products you're going to buy also that you bring?
Sure. Well, yeah, it depends on where you are in the process. But
Right.
so many times if we're engaged through an architect, the architect doesn't want to deal with it. They don't necessarily want us bringing all these people to the table, so we have to educate our architectural community. We have to scare them too.
Right.
And sometimes in order to get all the folks to the table. Now that security, and security is managed by facilities, sometimes it's now monitored and maintained by IT. You may have an outside guard or law enforcement agency involved. You've got to bring all those folks to the table as early in the process as you can.
Right, agreed. All right, so we were successful with one question. Let's try another one, see if we can succeed past that. So in the future, and let's once again juxtapose this with what your preconceived notions were when you came in, as you had meetings, and if that had changed. So where do you see the most significant change occurring in the industry when it comes to the electronic security solutions? And are those, and this would kind of prime the next question, are those solutions, are those areas commensurate with our changing risk and threat environment? John Pistol this morning was really great at defining an evolving threat environment, right? One of the things we spoke a lot about, this is a dissertation while you guys were voting, is during SIP 14, right? A lot of folks in this room had a lot of opportunities, a lot of projects within the utility industry to support SIP 14. The problem with SIP 14 is that terrorists and bad guys can adapt faster than we can regulate. So if you look at SIP 14 and when the event happened, when the rule was drafted, when those improvements had to be put in place, me as a bad guy, I can adapt and change my way I'm going to attack you tenfold in that amount of time. So when we're answering this question, I want to think about how those technologies are going to help us as consultants be adaptive for our clients in this advanced threat environment. So now we've got 32. Let's see where we ended up on that one. So we're kind of evenly across the board. Really, the power-related devices was the tail end along with intrusion detection. So VMS, right? We could kind of see that one being, as well as interest in associated hardware. So VMS, who chose VMS? I've already picked on you. Why did you choose VMS?
I think with the advent of analytics going forward, new technology, new change in analytics,
So perfect answer to help with one of the questions I've got is one of the things I looked at is how can the electronic systems, VMS is a perfect example, gather data and help you, be it whatever client is, be it a utility, be it an institution, higher learning, being more predictive of events versus reactive. So I kind of put it to the panel here. What do you guys see when it comes to VMS in the future being more predictive to help those end users react to a problem before it manifests itself versus having to react while it's occurring? I asked tough, broad questions, I'm sorry.
So I think it's going to be a combination of AI, machine learning, to use predictive analytics, but I think we've seen historically that learned behaviors in AI are less effective because you can't train it for everything. But I think I think an option G, which is the tool that unifies all of those, is really the right answer. In that we talked about data and information, but really it's taking the data and information and turning it into actionable intelligence, and that's I think the key. And I think AI is going to be the biggest way there.
So in that, the key to that success is taking that information, presenting it in a format that user, that security officer that's in the SOC, then understands it, doesn't have to do a tremendous amount of thought to be able to assemble those components and then respond appropriately.
It needs to fit into a set of SOPs that your standard operator can follow.
They can follow?
Yep.
Anybody else? Comments on that?
I think what I would say is I think G is a good comment. You know, it needs to be that all-inclusive system. You know, and I hate to use the dirty P word and say PSIM, but you know, it's sort of figuring out what that next tool is that puts everything together, and having the SOPs in place. I think PSIM, when PSIM first came out, it was just kind of like this thing that was going to shove everything together, but there was nothing sort of written behind it. And I think as consultants in the industry, we need to take back to the manufacturers and say, all right, well, we have an SOP that's written that says, if this occurs or when this occurs, this is what needs to happen. They need to have that G choice platform that looks at all of those items. You know, I think what we're going to start seeing is that trend between an access control and a video management platform. The line, when I started 20 years ago, it was a hard divided line because the systems are physically isolated from each other. It is now such a blended line. You know, what is VMS, what's access control? They're sort of doing the same functions, maybe in different ways, but you know, it's how that output gets presented, how that intelligent data gets used. You know, you look at a VMS platform, and like I said, I work aviation a lot. So the trend is when someone comes in the front of an airport terminal, they're going to walk towards a ticket counter. They're going to walk towards a checkpoint. Well, if suddenly you get a large mass of people walking the other direction, your actionable intelligence is maybe something's not right. You know, so that learning process is specific for that application. So I think it's really understanding what the SOPs are for the specific application and then writing the driver behind it or writing that deep dive intelligence behind it.
And that's an excellent point, and I'll use the analogy, I'm sure several in here have heard me say it before, is we see a lot of times where a client will spend millions of dollars putting our technology and our recommendations in place, and then they put all that technology in the hands of the lowest responsive bidder, right? And the analogy that I give for that is if you give a $300,000 combine to the Amish, what do? They hook a team of horses in front of it and drag it through a pasture. That doesn't mean they're dumb. That's how they know to use the technology. So part of that is educating our clients as well on what these measures are that you're going to put in place, that you're designing to, how that will affect the skill set of your operator, also the expectations of the operator. So how do you articulate that and using the manufacturer, right? Because a lot of times the tools that we get from them are capable of so much, but we just scratch the surface on what we can do because of the quality of operator that we have. So how do you guys approach that with your client base?
Well, we also have the conversation of what the cost is of not doing something, which is sometimes hard to quantify that number. And the other thing that our end users really like hearing is benchmarking statistics against other people in their same space. And that's a real easy way to get buy-in from the end users to say, you know, of the major players in your space, 3/4 of them are doing this. Do you want to be that far behind? And if this happens, how's that going to look? And nobody wants to take that risk on. And so you start having a real conversation at that point.
So it's almost like keeping up with the Joneses, right? Part of that is, as a client, you look at your peer institutions because if an event happens at your facility that the neighboring peer had mitigation in, they're going to ask you why you didn't have that particular mitigation. That's writing the story of defense on that. You know, it's an excellent point. So when you talk to these technology providers today, one of the things that I see from domestic and abroad is that, as we talked earlier, that really adaptive and changing threat environment. From what you saw today and listened to today, how do you feel that technology is keeping up with that changing threat environment? Okay, another tough question.
I'll jump on. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I think we're kind of going back around a similar answer. The problem today isn't that we're not collecting enough data. We're collecting a crushing amount of data. It's really, what's that security operations center middleware, the G option that we're missing? How do you synthesize all of that data and create actionable information? That's where our problem is. And then the other issue is that we're finding in our practice is we're being asked to help facilitate conversations like, hey, we put this gunshot detection system in and we get an alert, now what happens? Well, I can't answer that for you, but I can help facilitate the conversation between law enforcement and the owner, you know. So we're being asked to sort of intervene in interdepartmental operations sometimes that make us uncomfortable, but it all goes back to we're collecting too much data and without that middleware piece.
So the tools that we have available are the right tools. It's just not being put up in a manner, and I don't want to make it a broad term like that, but presented in a manner that becomes actionable. They're not pulling out the components that are most efficient and effective to them to make a good decision.
It's synthesizing all of that information.
So how do we go about, well, go ahead, please.
Well, I think most folks in the room, this isn't, rocket science. Very few physical security systems are really being utilized, to their fullest extent. Most organizations are using 10, 20, 25% of what their systems are capable. So it's not about the capability of the technologies being limiting. It's about the utilization of those technologies and tying them directly to their security operations, their overall business operations. So we can talk about future technologies, but we have to make sure we get the basics first, right? So when we look at our clients, we always start with what are they currently invested in? What are they currently capable of doing, and are they utilizing that before we talk about rip and replace or enhancements to that, because they need that money for improvements or operational needs before they need to purchase new equipment. But I think the evolution of this industry, as we get more and more intelligent about applying physical security technologies, comes to understand that the past has been mostly what I would classify as form over function. We would put in a siloed video management system. It used to be called CCTV system, and that didn't communicate to everything. And then a separate access control system, or card reader system, as we used to call them back in the day. And those would never talk to each other. And so we've gone over the past few decades of getting everything to talk to each other, and as my peers here have said, get all of that data, but we're not really using that data. We need to make that actionable. So what we're all learning and applying is trying to make this data more actionable so we can actually use it for knowledge, and then knowledge decisions to support security, not just buying widgets, not just applying new technologies because it exists, but actually making it actionable. But we're coming to your point of this question, what is the most significant change? I think the answer in support is G, is there's prime disruption in the industry because of the sensor changes, not software changes. We're not really coding differently. IoT is about the sensor changes and their connectivity to the internet or network capability, that wireless communications or wired communications capability that wasn't there before, going from dumb to intelligent. And so as we start seeing things like a flat cam, which is a literally flat camera that can just be pasted on a wall, if we start seeing electronic power-inducing devices putting underneath carpet, the built environment is going to drastically change, and we're not going to have video management systems and traditional cameras and video monitoring that. We're going to have sensors everywhere. We're going to walk into an environment and there's not going to be a spot that we won't be seen on a camera. There's not going to be a microphone that can't hear us. There's not going to be a means that doesn't know where we are in a building except in private areas. So as security consultants, we have to think forward as how can we take that data and make it actionable information regardless of what system it might have originated on, and truly unify it and use it for actual information. So the answer being G, solution G, whatever we call that software, is really about the true data analytics, the deep learning, the artificial intelligence, taking that advantage from it. So I'll point out, one of the vendors here, FST, essentially did that. They didn't take a traditional access control device and tied it to an access control system and provided that solution. They took a video management solution, security camera, and tied it to an access control system. You think that's novel, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to be seeing that time and time again. So I would actually predict that we're going to see manufacturers focused on the analytics, focused on the business intelligence and that deployment of that in the actual versus what sensor they're selling or what their server supports within that software. It's going to be more ubiquitous and more interconnected.
So you brought up an interesting point. You said earlier that eventually you'll be in a room or a part of a facility and there's nowhere you can go that you're not on video or you're not being recorded or what happens to that company when it comes to the supporting that from the privacy standpoint, that data, whether it is it's a camera that's monitoring a manufacturing floor, maybe it's a very unique process, but they monitor it for safety, the privacy support to manage that data. How does that affect us as consultants?
So we do a lot of employment investigations, and privacy comes into play a lot with those. And what most employees don't realize is they don't have an expectation of privacy at work. So that's the easy answer. That's not, the difficult answer is that's not practical. So, you know, how you balance that and the company's image versus what the law says are two different things. And I think it depends on what the company does, what the risk profile is, you know, what the culture of the business is. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that.
So what about the protection of the data from a theft perspective, right? So I used a bad example of a proprietary manufacturing technique that you're monitoring for safety and quality, how to protect that data. Is that part of a cyber patrol or a protocol, or is that means of access, and who can view such data like that?
Well, it's kind of all becoming the same.
Okay.
You know, I mean, as security starts falling more and more under IT, and you know, I think we're seeing the trend of security people actually reporting up to IT and CTOs and CISOs. The physical security protocols are going to start falling under the cyber protocols, and the access to that data and how it's stored are all going to be part of that same policy.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, at the end of the day, it's still people that are going to fail the system. So I think what we need to be cognizant about, and I was, as we were talking, I was trying to think of which airline shooting it was posted in, but the video that was shared to the news was off someone's cell phone camera who was sitting in the GSOC. You know, they literally sat there and recorded the playback video. So no one walked out with a USB stick of the video, but that GSOC allowed cell phones in there. You know, so it's really thinking about your soup to nuts, your entire security posture. You know, how do you want to be? How do you want to act? You know, do you want to put it in a cell phone blackout? You know, what does that really mean? Do you want to limit it to a certain aspect? You know, if it's corporate phones, how does that work? So it's really looking at everything that goes into it, not just the technology that's there. I'll sort of kick in a devil's advocate here, and you know, anti-Terminator taking over the world with technology. You know, we've done a lot of studies post, you know, again, being in the aviation field, we've done a lot of studies post a lot of the shootings that have gone on. And with all the technology and all the integration they had at those airports, what we have found statistically time over time is that it was, Fort Lauderdale was a perfect example. We were able to interview one of the maintenance guys, and he actually saw the shooter 2 hours prior to the event occurring, and he said, I just didn't get a good feeling about him. But he had no mechanism to report it. You know, so not only do we need to put that actionable intelligence into the systems, but there needs to be the policies and procedures behind it to support it, so that when people get that, you know, the hair on the back of their neck, or the retired law enforcement who get that feeling, how do they report it, and then what is your response protocol behind that? Because again, there's nothing worse than someone calling a 311 in an airport or something to report something that's going on, and you know, you see nothing come out of it on the backside. You know, so the employees need to have that level of confidence that there will be follow-up to, you know, theft of video or theft of intellectual property, and make sure, that, you know, not that an example is made, but that it's publicly known within the firm that this action will occur.
Mark, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and for the audience, so by show of hands, how many of the folks here have a privacy professional background? You filled a role as a privacy for a corporation. Raise your hand high if you don't mind. Right? Well, how many of us in this room are actually supporting privacy requirements for our clients? Right? It really should be everyone in this room, right? And I'm not just talking about personal privacy, you know, such as the standards that have kicked off in Europe and the standards we're seeing talked about in the US, and talking about, oh, well, this is a public video and this was shared. I'm not talking about that type of privacy. I'm talking about business privacy, the information security that we should be supporting for organizations. We're not really taking hold of and being responsible for our clients. Because how many, James Marcella made a perfect point this morning. How many organizations are more than happy to open up their servers and their archives to Google, to Microsoft, right, to Facebook? there is a culture of change in the business organizations, not just in the US, not just in Europe, all over the globe, that says we do not want to share our data, share our information with anyone outside of our organization. So we have to protect our clients by giving them that level of protection of information, regardless of what format it's in, whether it's digital, whether it's paper, whether it's access control databases. We have to protect them in some means. And so I see that being a trend that the manufacturers, that us as consultants, we need to support, because exactly as Rene's point is, information can be gathered in so many different mediums, but how are we controlling it from being used for bad intent, right? I had an exact same situation with a client of mine. It was university, and a not proper thinking security officer decided to take video of a faculty member falling down and said this was hilarious and started sending it around campus. Well, before you knew it, it got to students, it got to public sources, and there was massive fallout from that, right? That's a policy training issue, but there's many other aspects of this mountain of data that we're collecting that needs to be protected. It needs to be protected through policy, procedures, through technology accordingly. So we really should be, I would propose that we really should be privacy advocates also, in addition to security consultants, because we're trying to keep our business's information private accordingly.
Well,
Excellent.
I think to follow up on that, security is kind of the forgotten one when it comes to data privacy. There's all these global companies that have privacy attorneys that are doing all these different things for the company, and then you've set up camera systems that go overseas and cross different international territories and access control systems. And how are we controlling the flow of that data, and how is that in accordance with those international data privacy laws for different unions and different territories? So as consultants too, as we're setting up these global systems, we've got to make sure that the company hasn't forgotten that those laws apply to security as well.
Excellent, thank you. So before we get going too far, I wanted to open the floor to questions that you guys might have that I have failed to ask. Right here, ma'am, there's two. Yep. And she's got a microphone. I think we want to make sure we hear you clearly.
You made the comment that, and I agree with it, that, I say usually about 15% of a system's capabilities are used, and you're talking about response scenarios, having SOPs, and yet what it really falls back to, we might have a $80,000 a year security director in a facility, but we're still relying on $10 to $12 an hour guards. So we can't leverage the technology because, to be quite honest, there's too much rotation, there's too much people moving out. So what are you seeing to up that level of personnel for the response side? Because that's really where the weak link is. You can have the greatest stuff in place, and if people won't use it, can't use it, don't know how to use it, it's pointless anyways. The system will just atrophy. So I guess the question is how do you get around that?
I'll take that as directed at me, but so I would actually state that I agree with you that whatever is designed, that's implemented, needs to be able to support that level of operator, right? But that doesn't mean that shouldn't be giving them technology. The technology should be in the form that they're capable of, right? The application of putting super simple apps, on a mobile device to allow a security guard to use is here today. Most manufacturers can support that in one form or fashion. Whether they've written that app or not in that type of GUI that we want them to is a different question, but that's not a lack of technology being present, and it's not a lack of their capability. But I think the decision of what that officer should be doing is a management decision. So the management needs to be involved. Management needs to define their operations and their expectations of what that, $12 an hour officer is going to do or not.
And I think the other thing we need to think about is, again, future looking. My kids are 7 and 9, so my 9-year-old has had an iPad since he was 2 years old. So that $10 an hour guard as we get down the road, I think what we need to press on the manufacturers is to have those SOPs written into the response protocols. So they are used to, that generation is going to be used to, when they see an alarm event come in, give them actionable things for them to do. Who to call, what to do, how to respond to it. and that they can't just click OK to proceed it. They have to put in dialogue. They have to put in whatever they did, and then that becomes sort of that circular loop. And what we need to make sure our clients are doing is following back up with that. So when they had an alarm event, were the procedures followed? If the procedures weren't, it needs to go back around either for retraining or replacing that person in that position.
One of the things that you alluded to is turnover.
Right.
Turnover in that industry is murder. I mean, it's just horrible because it's the nature of the industry. One of our clients had success, and they were in a military town, was really focusing on men and women coming out of the military. They're used to swing shifts, but one of the things that they're accepting is, hey, I know I'm going to lose this guy or gal in 2 or 3 years because they're going to get out and use their GI Bill and go to school, or they're going to buy enough time till they get into law enforcement. But you're getting a little bit higher clientele of an individual who understands swing shifts, dedication, duty, all those things. It's a heck of a lot easier for us to sit up here and preach that than for that G4S or Securitas or WAC and whoever it is to actually reach out to those folks. Because coming out of the military, a lot of these guys and gals have other opportunities. That's been where we've experienced the most success in lowering turnover, is getting a higher caliber individual, knowing they are going to turn over when they had that next step, be it school or law enforcement or what have you. We did not find necessarily a correlation with higher pay getting to that retention, because you could hit a dollar amount that you could retain them, but it was too high for the company to absorb for a long period of time. So it's the old chicken and the egg. You're always going to struggle with that. Anybody else have anything you want to add to that?
I think two brief things. One is training. We focus on making sure that our clients understand that they have to put together a systematic training program when you have a high turnover situation. And then the other aspect is we as a community need to continue to focus on the usability of the products that we're specifying. I didn't really hear any manufacturers today talk about user interface or user experience. It doesn't mean you're not working on it, but we can't lose sight of the fact that the products that we're specifying have to be used by lowest common denominator on a daily basis. It's not us making it work every day.
Good point. You had a question, sir? I think there was.
Yeah, so should we fit the technology to the person or the person to the technology? In what you just said. I think we've all had the experience of the $10 an hour guard monitoring console full of equipment who either doesn't care, doesn't get paid enough for, or doesn't have the mental skill sets to operate that. So my challenge is what level and how do we know that guy can do the new challenges of doing an SOC and that sort of stuff. Things like video testing for vigilance and stuff like that. The guy in South Africa is going to test for doing stuff like that. And that sort of stuff. How can we better respond to that as consultants? Really, I think the owner looks for us to maybe design a system. And the one thing I ask you is more than just that. Everything you guys have been saying, it's training, it's policies, it's who you're going to put in charge of the system. And secondly, the guy that's in charge of the system, the person that's in charge of the system often does not see the same issues as we do. He'll shut down tomorrow or something like that, rather than, in quantities, rather than sit there and get called, what he considers small. And policy, as you mentioned, would say, okay, there's a policy that we don't do that.
Right.
You figure out what the problem is, and then you deal with it. So, back to my question. How do you select those people, and what do you use for the selection process?
So it'd be interesting, the panel as well. One of the things that we've had success with was in employment testing from the contract guard force. Kind of a basic aptitude for the technologies that are going to be in place. Not necessarily the technology, but finding tools and ways to measure their aptitude for working with technology. Is it someone that's been exposed to it, as you allude to with your, that's a great point. As our children get older, they're going to be able to do things a lot faster with technology because they've been exposed to it longer. But a lot of that I've seen has been aptitude testing early on to determine the applicant's ability. But that is pushed to the guard force. It's not the consultant world. It's providing guidance to the owner to help that guard selection process. And I see what the panel has to say as well. It was that poignant.
I know the military has tested. Where, what tests are?
Well, no, it's generally from our experience, and I'll put it in, is those guard force providers, we help them develop the aptitude test based on the technologies that they're going to use. So we also ask open-ended questions. You see that at a lot of employment agencies if you're comfort using Excel. Well, then you morph those questions into how do you use apps on your phone? What apps do you like to use? You can start gathering some, at least high-level ability to interact with technology. And that's generally the base. Then as they go into that site-specific training and actually interact with the technology, those hiring have the ability to flush out those that they might be comfortable with on their phone, but now we're talking about navigating multiple systems. It's beyond their skill set. And that's fine. Maybe another account is their best home. But that's where we've seen the success in getting the right folks, but it has not helped with a great retention on those.
RJ,
Yes.
over here.
Oh, God. I was like, God, is that you?
I have several corporate clients. They have their own security training, and the officer will have to spend several weeks, and before they're actually able to go on duty, they have to go through a complete test of operational familiarity and demonstrate the ability to acknowledge all of the alarms, operate all of the systems, know where all the core assets are, and so forth. So this is all documented, and it's in their file. Now, a larger point is some people are more open to technology and familiar with it and comfortable with it, and others are not. We all want staff to be cross-trained, but you also have to come to the conclusion that sometimes it's better off to put people where their sweet spot and comfort level is if you've got the flexibility in your staff to do that. But no one should be sitting in front of a piece of equipment without being trained on it and demonstrate proficiency in it. And if that's happening, then that's on the end user's fault. And that's our job to make sure that they're not letting that happen.
Agreed. Excellent point. We got a question up here at table 6. Ma'am, right up here. Yep.
Thanks. In reference to this question here, there's one aspect that's not listed here that I think is going to see some of the most change, but I'm not sure. My question is going to be, how do we as the community help that change? And that's on the integration front. When an architect builds a diagram and a design, they expect that the contractor is going to be able to put the 2x4s together correctly and hang the drywall correctly. There's best practices already in place. Within security architecture, there were those things in place, but now that everything's become essentially an enterprise network, those don't exist anymore. And I think that the integrator community could use a little training of their own. And so from the consulting side, how do we push that down to ensure that things are being set up correctly? Do we just deny bids that don't have a qualified person on staff? Are we looking for pre-certification? I just kind of want to get that part of the conversation started, because I think that's where we're going to see the biggest change is on qualified integrators who can actually install things to certain levels of network best practices.
Right, and the networking piece that I've seen in the integrated community, it's becoming more and more, right? There are organizations like PSA Tech that do a really good job at helping train those staff. But I think you hit the nail on the head, and I'd like to hear the panel as well, is that specifications can really do a good job of driving that. The firm that is selected will have so many folks that are certified in X, and that it will have this background training, and it's demonstratable in a way to help one vet the installation. The one thing I'll add on to that, though, all because if it's in the specification, it doesn't always mean it's done, right? It's the old Marine Corps adage, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. All the spec does is gives you the legal ability to go back and say, now do it right. One of the things that we see the value in is going out during the installation process and having those periodic spot checks to make sure it is a specification. If they are sending those folks out. Panel like to add, that'd be great.
I mean, on our large infrastructure projects, we'll actually require the systems integrator to build a test lab, so that every interface is tested in an air-gapped system before it actually even gets deployed onto a real-world application. I would say where we as consultants, and I'll say I've been at fault to this, is that sometimes we're not as clear as we can be as to what the interface needs to be, and what it needs to do. So we now, when we start, again, aviation, so we write an average aviation interface spec, it'll be 100-something pages because it outlines every single widget that has to interface with everything, and we're talking, security is going to interface with, this camera is going to do this, and it's a bidirectional or one directional, and how is the data exchanged? I think we as consultants need to be as specific as possible as to the level of expectation. I've seen a lot of integration specs go out where it's, an alarm will happen, the camera will get called up. Well, that's great. There's about 17 different ways you can do that, and I wanted it to be a smart interface that used .NET protocol, and the integrator did it using relays. They both meet the intent, but if me as a consultant was not clear in my spec, it's sort of not fair to the team. So I think one, we need to look at ourselves to make sure we're giving the manufacturers the right effort, and I think on the manufacturing side, it's to also understand what's out there as to what we're integrating. What are we trying to touch? How are we trying to make it work? What is the ultimate goal of it? And make sure we just document that in the level of detail that we'd expect to.
As a follow-up to that, though, to me that sounds like a larger scope and more hours to write that specification, which means that the end user has to bear that cost, as opposed to not having to do that kind of specification and having the integrators bear that cost to have that in-house expertise. So I guess there's a fine line between costing too much to do the project because you're going to do it right, and having.
And it's a risk discussion,
it's
right?
A risk. Yeah, it's a risk about how much risk avoidance are you going to buy.
Right.
So you can go to you can go to a systems integrator who can write a systems integration spec for you, which is great. But if they're not a systems integrator in the security market who understands the security capabilities, you're just going to get an integrated system, but it may not actually be an integrated security system. So I think that's where, it's having that frank and honest discussion with the client that, yes, you can have this level of system integration. This is what it's going to cost you, and it can be a consultant that develops it, or it could be a systems integrator who develops it, but someone needs to at least capture the inherent of what those requirements are.
And to support what Rene is saying is, his example with the labs is for very large projects where it really is justified. But on every project, our clients are hiring us for our expertise. They're usually hiring us for something that they can't do, they're not capable of doing on their own. And so there's always an education piece to this. So we have to be very clear in our communications, not just with the integrator, but also with the owner about what the expectations are. So we can specify certifications, which we do, and we rely on those to help essentially identify the leaders in the industry that are going to install what we expect them, and also give specific performance requirements and additional technical requirements. But then we also communicate and educate our client as to what items are in the spec and why they're there. Because we're not necessarily going to be in every meeting where the construction project is brought up. And so we're going to expect our client to be there to defend our specification when we're not there. We're going to expect the construction team to be there to defend our specification when we're not there. And if they don't have an understanding, they haven't been clearly communicated as to what we're expecting, what the specification is identifying, then it's harder for them to defend it. So once they're clear about those roles, they'll be there to toe the line, so to speak.
RJ, since this is a technology discussion, and I've got a personal curiosity about this, to what extent do you consultants and other consultants think that you are influencing, can or should influence what these manufacturers out here are designing and building for you? Do you feel like you have any power, like anybody's listening? You want more power? How do you see that? What would you like? With the manufacturer, to drive the technology, to drive these products. I don't know if that's happening or not, but I'd like to hear.
To the sponsors, don't take this the wrong way. But my experience has been is that it follows the money. So if Arup as a large organization, if we come to them with you know, a 10 global client site that wants X, they're probably going to give them X. You know, they're going to go back to their R&D folks and they're going to test it and they're going to build it and they're going to deploy it and they're going to say, here you go, and it's now potentially part of their standard product line offering. If it's a K through 12 school that, you know, wants this little widget that looks like a different thing, we'll roadmap it. You know, I hate to sound harsh, but that's sometimes I think what it comes down to is, you know, you get that feedback of, we'll look at it, and if it's on their roadmap, it may get pushed a little sooner. But if it's not on the roadmap, you know, it really depends on how much money's coming behind it that can put that investment into it.
So Rene, that kind of tells me that you're saying you're putting the manufacturers in a position of, if we build it, they will come. And is that the right way to do it? I mean, don't you think you can give them some more direction about where they ought to be taking things because of your insight and what you're hearing from your clients in general? Mark?
Rene, did you want to respond? So at the end of the day, as much technology as we have, as much education certifications we have, it's really about human relationships, right? So if I have an end user, if I have a client of mine who I have a really strong relationship with, I've developed a level of trust. So when I communicate to that client recommendations, they're going to trust me and work off of that. In the same, if a client has a really good integrator that's supporting them on project after project, and they trust that integrator, they're going to be influenced by that integrator. I don't think that is going to change. You know, the client is going to go with what they trust, who they know, what they're familiar with. That is regardless of the technology that's available. What we can give them through this technology is capability to really ease their pain and suffering. And so as time goes on, I think we have more and more influence with the clients. We have more and more influence with manufacturers because that's what the clients are asking for in kind. And that's because the built environment, the physical world, is getting more and more expensive every day. Real estate cost per square foot is going up, not down. So that means as we use technologies and implement technologies in these built environments, they're going to be more valuable to an organization because of that. They may have less buildings overall as their workforce has gone more mobile and such, but what they do own is going to increase in value, and therefore our influence is going to increase, in my opinion, because of that. And then you couple the fact with the built environment right now is not really being driven by facilities departments. They're not really being driven by safety departments. Security has typically more play in most organizations than the other departments do outside of the architect. So as long as we have a great relationship with an architect, we can help take advantage of that built environment as it gets, you know, more and more expensive and more valuable to an organization when they do have those existing cases.
I'd like to say something. I'd like to say something from the manufacturer's perspective. I think it's really dependent on the manufacturer of, you know, how they listen. You know, we go to these trade shows as Altronics, and I could probably speak the same for my competitor on the other side of the room. You know, when we go to these trade shows and you guys come out to ASIS or we meet you at Security Exchange or wherever it may be, or here, and you tell us, okay, this is what I'm trying to do, and I need a solution for that. And we listen to that. And sometimes you hear it enough times, you've heard it once at the same trade show or various trade shows, you make it. The person has an application. You may have a project that requires 900 of them. We're going to listen, right? If you need a one-off, is it something that we can modify that we currently have that's a easy modification? We listen to that. So you hear things enough times, and depending on the manufacturer, because some manufacturers have different policies of how they create new products, and they have to go through steps and formalities and meetings and those type of things. But you get a company such as Altronics, and you take and we listen to what you have, what you need. You know, we can make things easily on the fly. I mean, just last year, we had a customer needed 3 power supplies that had a certain voltage and something that we could modify. We took that call at 9 a.m. It was manufactured and shipped out that afternoon. You know, so we can do things that quickly, but I think if the influence comes from you guys, there's a reason why we have 1,100 products. Not because we want to have 1,100 products, but because you guys ask for it. You know, and we don't discontinue anything. Why? Because the same product that was made 34 years ago is still being bought in thousands today. So those type of things, that influence comes from you guys. That's why we manufacture equipment, why we make new products. Because we get asked by you guys, the integrators, and the end users at these trade shows for something that is not available yet or a solution to a problem. And that's what we, as manufacturers, all are. We're solutions providers to problems that the industry has. So by listening to that, we manufacture those things. So it is a big influence of what you guys say and tell us.
Part of that is really what I'm hearing, Reagan, is continuing hearing of that helps substantiate the investments from the manufacturer. And so while we're also hearing that we run into unique one-offs, we've got to be able to help build that case, so to speak, on why that particular manufacturer should help. I get it from both sides, right? I get the manufacturer, you don't want to invest $100,000 to sell me something for 10 grand to my client. Conversely, we want to be that solution provider for that client. And so part of that is that how do we, as consultants, knowing that there are limitations to the manufacturer, we get it, we understand that. We also understand that our clients watch NCIS and everything else. How do you manage those expectations? Yeah, I'm sure many manufacturers are doing NCIS law for $40 million. But managing those client expectations as well as understanding the manufacturer. How do you guys do it?
For me, it's simple. Be honest and don't be greedy. Tell them what they're going to get, show them what they're going to get before they signed off so that their expectations are managed.
See, we're getting a sign from the back there.
Last question.
Well, I would just say, you know, holding people accountable too. I think one of the things that we're pretty bad at in the industry is standards, and we throw terms around a lot, like integrated and unified, and maybe even ONVIF. But you know, I think as we talk about the option G and the ultimate end solution, I think it's important that we actually put some weight behind those terms, because we're selling these things to our clients and saying, hey, we've got this unified platform for you, or all these things are going to integrate, when in fact maybe they won't actually, or you know, we finally get everything working together and then we have to do a version upgrade on one thing and all the connections are broken. So I think, you know, just holding people accountable and you know, really using those terms the way that they should be used and not throwing them around.
So I think we're wrapping up. So first, thank you to our panel. It was an excellent discussion. Thank you very much.